Benny Green. Born in New York, Benny Green grew up in Berkeley, California, and began classical piano studies at the age of 7. Influenced by his father, a tenor saxophonist, his attention soon turned to jazz, supported by mentors such as Walter Bishop Jr. and others. Plus, his love for the music propelled him to the upper strata of jazz luminaries. Green began his touring life with Betty Carter for 4 years and subsequently realized a lifelong dream of becoming a jazz messenger with Art Blakey from 1987 to 1989. 1989 saw Green joining the Freddie Hubbard Quintet for 3 years, and from 1992 to 96, Green worked in the Ray Brown Trio. Apart from numerous accolades, in 1993, Oscar Peterson chose Benny as the first recipient of the City of Toronto's Glenn Gould International Protégé Prize in Music, which later resulted in the two performing in a double piano album, Oscar and Benny, recorded in 1998. A prolifically recorded musician, Green has appeared on well over 100 recordings. As a leader of his own groups, Benny's recording career began with 2 albums for the Dutch label Crisscross, Prelude, and In This Direction. In 1990, Green started recording for Blue Note, which yielded 7 highly rated albums. In 2000, his debut recording on Telarc Jazz entitled Naturally was released, which featured bassist Christian McBride and guitarist Russell Malone. The 2000s saw the release of a solo piano date, Green's Blues, and in 2003, Jazz at the Bistro, followed by Bluebird. His most recent albums are 2011's trio date Source, a 2013 album with all original music, Magic Beans, and a live album in 2015, Live in Santa Cruz. Benny, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show.
Thank you very much, Nikhil. And then since the record you mentioned, Live in Santa Cruz, my most recent available release is called Happiness, also recorded live at the Columba in Santa Cruz.
Benny, it's so great to have you on the show. You're somebody I've admired for quite a while. I discovered you I'm a guitarist, so I found my guitar teacher mentioned Russell Malone as somebody to check out. And then I watched a video of you on YouTube playing Jingles, a Wes Montgomery tone with Russell Malone, and it was just burning stuff. And I absolutely was wowed totally. And so from then on, I kind of was, I started in Berkeley as a guy who, there are so many different strands of jazz, but I really started to really dig authentic bebop and hard bop when I was introduced to teacher Barry Harris on YouTube. And through him, I found lots of great players like you and Dr. Charles McPherson. What was it like for you growing up? How did you discover jazz, and which players really turned you onto the music?
Well, when I was growing up, Nikhil, my father, who played the tenor saxophone, was listening to jazz records at home, especially a Thelonious Monk album called Monk's Dream from 1962 with his quartet with Charlie Rouse, John Orr, and Frankie Dunlop, and also a Charlie Parker collection, which was basically the Dial recordings from 1947 with Miles Davis and Duke Jordan and Tommy Potter and Max Roach, pieces like Scrapple from the Apple and Dewey Square. So I was hearing those 2 records playing around the house almost daily. Plus, I was hearing my father play his tenor saxophone. He was very inspired by Lester Young. I was hearing this sound, and I was really drawn to it. Of course, I didn't know anything about it, but I was able to discern while my father was listening to, for example, the Monk record. I could discern the instruments, the 4 instruments, the tenor saxophone, piano, bass, and drums. And when he was listening to the Charlie Parker records, I was very intrigued by these melodies, these lean single-note melodies that Charlie Parker's alto saxophone and Miles Davis with a muted trumpet, not a Harmon mute as is typically played these days, but I guess maybe a regular mute. It's not a cut mute. And the sound of them, the 2 instruments, the muted brass instrument and the woodwind saxophone, playing these melodies in unison or in octaves or in harmonies, was really intriguing. And I listening to these records with my father every day, and he saw I had an interest in the music. We didn't have we didn't have a piano in our home yet. We got a piano when I was 6, and I was very fascinated with the piano and was sitting at the piano every day, trying to actually start writing my own songs, not knowing what I was doing, but just fascinating and the low notes and the high notes and making combinations. And I did not at that time connect the jazz records my father was playing with me playing the piano. I didn't quite make that connection. And so when I went into what was the 4th grade, when I was around 9 years old, a school called Longfellow Elementary School in Berkeley, California. There was a wonderful man who passed some years ago now named Phil Hardyman, and he would go to all the Berkeley public schools, beginning at the fourth grade level, all up through the high school, and teach us about jazz. And seeing kids my own age improvising on a 12-bar B-flat blues, that's when the connection started to happen for me between the piano and the jazz records my father was listening to. It was very important for me to see kids my own age attempting to play the music that I had prior to that associated only with older people like my father and the faces on his record covers.
Could I ask you a quick question? When you were starting to pick up things from records at a young age, do you have perfect pitch or highly developed relative pitch or both?
I would say neither, if I'm being honest. When I'm playing more often, my relative pitch gets a little better, but I can't claim perfect pitch at all. I've been around many musicians who have it, and I don't have that. I just try my best.
I heard from my interview with Dr. Charles McPherson, he said Charlie Parker didn't have perfect pitch, so I think it's fine as long as you have good.
That's encouraging.
So, what did Phil Hardyman teach you, and what level? Did he teach you to improvise, or was it with your dad?
Well, what Mr. Hardyman would do is he would write out what we call a blues scale. You know what that is?
Yeah.
So if we were playing a B-flat blues, he'd write out these notes like ascending B-flat, D-flat, E-flat, E natural, F, A-flat, and then up, the next octave, B-flat. That scale. And he would call them solo notes. And he would say that you could choose any combination and any rhythm from among these notes when you played a B-flat blues, and it would sound pretty good. And and getting to do that started to give us kids confidence about choosing our own notes, and they would be appropriately funky for the blues and not out of place. And I thought that simple act on his part was really brilliant in liberating us kids and just kind of opening up our minds to the possibility of really improvising, choosing our own notes, playing them in our own way with our own rhythms and our own inflection and phrasing. So that was a great help for us.
Was he your main teacher, or did you have a private mentor in California before you moved to New York?
Well, so again, this is when I was 9 years old. Moving forward to my adolescence, when I was more like 12, 13, 14 in there, several jazz pianists in the San Francisco Bay Area, all of whom have passed on now, I should say, each showed me different things. There were so many of them. There was Ed Kelly and Bill Bell, a man named Carl Andrews, actually. He may still be with us, living in the Northwest. Dick Whittington is actually still with us, the man that ran the Mabeck Recital Hall series. And all these people, and a beautiful, brilliant man named Smith Dobson. He took me to hear my first Horace Silver show at the Keystone Corner in San Francisco. And all these fellows really looked out for me. And the thing is, more than being teachers, they were wonderful teachers, but they were they were players. They were jazz piano players who I admired and respected. So it was very applicable for me, what they had to show. And I really appreciated that they looked out for me, and I began to get a sense of family in the music, a sense of culture in this music through them.
And so I just want to get that final couple of years before you moved to New York. Were you working? You mentioned in another interview that you kind of knew that at 13, this was the music that you wanted to play for the rest of your life. So
yes.
I'm kind of curious, when you took it at that point, when it became super serious for you, what was your approach to getting as good as you could at that time?
Well, see, this is where my father really stepped in, because when I was maybe 10 or 11, let's say 11, he spoke with me very seriously about the fact that if I was even dabbling in jazz, if I was even flirting with jazz, he said, you're going to have to choose whether this is just a hobby or this is going to be your life. And when he said that, he looked me in the eye, and I felt very strongly convicted that this is it. I'm going to do this. And he said, okay, this is good. He said, then I'm going to help you, he said. And I should explain that my father, who played with really tremendous feeling, but he couldn't read music, he wanted better for me in my career. And he said, I want you to learn how to read music. And he said, I want you to learn the standards We meant the standard American popular songs, by the Gershwins and Cole Porters. And he said, I want you to learn about the history of the music. And at that time, Nikhil, we had a great radio station in the San Francisco Bay Area called K-Jazz. And he said, I want you to listen to the radio station, and I want you to begin to get a sense of the history of this music. And he said, and I will help you. And he sure did. Just talking about the musicians and their influences, as you and I were speaking of a little earlier, how, one player hears a player who came before them and is inspired to want to become a part of the music and draws ideas from the players who came before, and somehow they ultimately personalize the music. And my father wanted me to get a sense of the family tree and the development of the music.
Nowadays, people use, when you're learning tunes, a lot of kids nowadays, they've got fake books, real books. But what did you guys do back in the day? Like, what was your approach to learning a tune?
Well, the thing is, we had fake books too, obviously not in digital format, big, heavy paper books. But I always understood, even as a kid, that those fake books were just like a cheat sheet. They're like a very superficial sketch, typically not quite accurate, by the way, of the melody and just the codified version of chord symbols. But I understood when I would listen to the records, which is what I was doing all daily, that the music is a human thing. It's an emotional thing. It's a spiritual thing. And these qualities that make the music so beautiful, it can't quite be translated to a piece of paper. So the humanity that I felt coming through the records from the beginning, listening to those Monk records and Charlie Parker, we call him Bird, of course, those Monk and Bird records with my father, I always had a sense that these are human beings playing the music and instilling it with their soul, their creative soul and character and personality. And so I always understood that those fake books and lead sheets were there to give us some basic data, but the fake books are not the music.
Did you learn solos off the record? Like, would you memorize an entire solo? Is that something you would do, or would you take up parts of a solo?
I took it upon myself to transcribe some solos. No one assigned it to me, but I wanted to learn, begin to try to learn some of the language, So I transcribed Charlie Parker, Now's the Time, and Billy's Bounce. I transcribed some Bud Powell from the album Dancing with Bud from 1962. The tempos were kind of medium and not too fast. I transcribed a solo from someone who really was coming from hard bop at the time of the recording I transcribed, Herbie Hancock, for all effective purposes, before he really got together with Wayne Shorter in Miles Davis's band in 1964, late 1964, when Wayne started playing with Miles. Prior to that, Herbie Hancock was a very progressive, hard bop pianist. And I transcribed his solo, which was actually recorded just before Wayne Shorter joined Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock's solo on the piece One Finger Snap from Herbie Hancock's 1964 recording, Empyrean Isles. And back then, as you know, we didn't have CD players or any kind of digital format. So what I did was we had LP records, and this record player I had, actually it was at a friend's house, I should say, you could slow it down to half speed rather than the record rotating at 33 1/3 rounds per minute, RPM. You could play it at 16, which made the record half speed and brought it down an octave. So I recorded that just with a microphone on my little cassette tape recorder and used that to work with to transcribe Herbie Hancock's piano solo. And what I came to realize after transcribing his 10-chorus solo is that what really, really fascinated me most about that solo was the feeling achieved by the entire rhythm section, not just Herbie Hancock's piano, but the combination of the piano, bass, and drums, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Tony Williams. And at the time I was a kid, I only transcribed Herbie Hancock's right-hand part. I didn't even occur to me the significance of what Herbie was doing with his left hand. But all these years later now, as we're speaking, I've come to realize that part of what makes the feeling achieved by all three players, piano, bass, and drums, during Herbie Hancock's piano solo, so very hip, is what Herbie does not do with his left hand. In other words, that piece is a 20-bar form, And pretty much every time you get to the 11th and 12th bar, Herbie Hancock plays nothing with his left hand. He almost always leaves that space completely open. So I wasn't thinking about these nuances when I was a kid, but what I've come to realize is by Herbie Hancock not placing his left hand during that time, it allows us listeners air and space to appreciate Ron Carter's bass notes in there. So what I didn't know as a kid was that a jazz solo where we applaud for the soloist who's standing out front. It's actually a team effort made by the entire band.
When you moved to New York, you mentioned that you had a New York father, Walter Bishop Jr. Now, he's not as famous as like a Bud Powell, but he played with Charlie Parker, and he was a very serious pianist and a great musician. Were you taking lessons with him? Can you describe the experience you had?
Absolutely. So I always saw Walter Bishop Jr. as a second-generation bebopper who was a link for me historically to Charlie Parker, Jackie McLean, Miles Davis, Art Blakey, these people he had played and worked and recorded with. And because, as you said, he wasn't that famous while I was growing up in California, he never came out there to perform on tour. He was one of the people who, when I moved back to New York at the age of 19, because I was born in New York City, but grew up in Berkeley, California, as you mentioned. When I moved back to New York in 1982, I made a point to look up Walter Bishop Jr., to find out where he'd be playing, and to go hear him and to meet him and to ask him for lessons, because I really wanted to absorb the language through him, if he'd be willing to help me. So I've been listening to Walter Bishop Jr. on several recordings, especially a Jackie McLean album called Capuchin Swing, a Blue Note record from 1960, featuring Blue Mitchell and Walter Bishop Jr. and Paul Chambers and Art Taylor. I didn't realize at the time that Art Taylor, Walter Bishop Jr., Jackie McLean, and Sonny Rollins had all grown up together in a very certain neighborhood of Harlem called Sugar Hill. I didn't know about that connection they had. They were working on this music as kids together. So I found Walter playing a show at the Jazz Forum with the Bill Hardman Jr. Cook Quintet, and I approached him on the intermission, and he was very approachable, very friendly and amicable, very easy to speak with, not intimidating. And I asked him if I could possibly take a lesson with him. He said sure, and he gave me his card, and we made arrangements. And I went to his house, and he showed me his piano, and he lit up a cigarette and went and stood in the window. He said, "Play me something." And so what I chose to play him was my rendition of his trio arrangement of the piece "Don't Blame Me" from Jackie McLean's album Capuchin Swing. So by the time I was getting into the bridge, about 17, 18 bars into the piece, Walter had come over and he was standing behind me, and he said, "That's from," and I said, "I know." And it made this bond between us instantly. And when I came for my second lesson, at the end of the lesson, I went to pay Walter his money, and he refused the money. And he said, "Let's not keep it on this level anymore." And I didn't understand what he meant. I was just a kid. And so I tried to hand the money, and then he sort of raised his voice. He said, "I said, let's not keep it on this level." And that's when I realized that he really cared about me, and he saw something in me, and he really wanted to help me. And it wasn't about charging me money for a lesson. It was about something deeper. And Walter really loved me. I was so green. I was so young and naive. It was my first time living outside of my parents' home. There was just so much about life that I didn't know, and there still is, of course. But he said, "I'm your New York father." And he would take me to shows, and he would listen to me at jam sessions and kind of criticize my playing, but with love. And once he said, "You sound like a striped tie on a plaid shirt, just way too busy." He said, "I see we're going to need to work on your comping." And for any of your listeners who don't know that term, you understand as a jazz musician, comping in a jazz context means accompaniment, jazz accompaniment. And the fact that he said, "I see that we're going to need to work on it," that was showing me that he was being a team with me. He really cared about me, and he really was treating me like a son.
What would he teach you? What encompassed the lesson with Walter Bishop Jr.?
The thing is, he was so selfless a teacher. because I really wanted to learn how to play just like him. And he wanted something else from me. He wanted me to learn, just as my father had encouraged, more about the whole history of the music, not to just focus on one player. And so he assigned me to transcribe McCoy Tyner solos from the album The Real McCoy that McCoy Tyner recorded in 1967 on the Blue Note label, featuring Joe Henderson and Ron Carter and Elvin Jones. Walter Bishop Jr., a bebopper, as you know, assigned me to transcribe McCoy Tyner's solos on Passion Dance and 4x5 because he wanted me to learn more of a wider scope of jazz than just focusing on bebop. And then, all these years later, seeing all the different trends that have occurred in the music during my lifetime so far has caused me to want to fortify my bebop roots more and more, because I care about and love this music, as I know you do, Nikhil. And so I never really sought out to be a purist so much as just to be a part of jazz. But because I care about jazz, and I've seen such a neglect for bebop and hard bop, with young people being constantly fascinated with whatever the current trend of the month is, it's caused me to want to try to better honor what I've been given by really trying to refine my sound and conception as a hard bopper.
Thank goodness you say this, because as a student, when I went through my jazz education, it really felt like we didn't get a sense of the tradition, and there really is a firm tradition there. And when you it's so fascinating that you worked with Walter Bishop Jr. I did some research for this interview, and I found out that he worked with Charlie Parker from 1951 to 1954. Did he ever talk about Charlie Parker? Did he bring up any interesting stories about Charlie Parker?
We talk about Bird all the time, and the first recordings of Walter Bishop Jr. with Charlie Parker are from recorded live at Birdland in 1950. And you're right, he wasn't an official member of the band yet, before they recorded Opera Vav and Back Home Blues, Kansas City Blues, that is, in 1951, as you mentioned. We talk about Charlie Parker all the time, and how he said Charlie Parker would always start the show with a very, 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 very fast tempo, and Walter said it made the whole rest of the night just seem really easy after starting really fast. He'd wake up the band like that. Walter talked about the fact that when he first sat in with Charlie Parker, Al Haig was Charlie Parker's pianist at the time, and Walter thought he was just a teenager. He thought that he cut Al Haig. He thought that he played better than Al Haig, but Charlie Parker did not call him for gigs yet. He kept Al Haig in the band, and because Walter was so young and immature, according to him, that it really hurt his feelings that Charlie Parker didn't hire him at first. And unfortunately, Walter told me that is how and why that he started using drugs, actually, that Walter started using drugs to numb his pain from feeling he was hurt that Charlie Parker hadn't hired him. But a few years later, Charlie Parker did hire him, and Walter said he and Al Haig actually became very good friends, and he began to realize that the music is a family, and it's not a competition. But of course, he was too young to understand at the time.
When he was working with Charlie Parker, what musical did Charlie Parker have a great sense of harmony? Could he look at the piano and tell the piano player what to do? And I'm so curious how he thought in rehearsals and on the bandstand and that kind of thing.
Well, all I know, of course, is through what my elders have told me. I actually haven't heard any account at all of Charlie Parker at the piano. And we know, reading Miles Davis's autobiography, that apparently Charlie Parker basically wouldn't rehearse with the band. He would leave it to the band to rehearse, and he would just sort of show up out of nowhere, so to speak, and just play his tail off. So there's a lot of mystery surrounding.
Oh, I hate that. I hate that.
Charlie Parker practiced.
I just hate
well,
that.
Listen,
it's so hard to find him talking about music,
Yeah, but this is why we have a Barry Harris.
Oh, yeah.
To really, he's dedicated his life to helping us younger folks try to get a clue into what the language even is.
Did Walter Bishop ever try? He was authentic, so he had a great sense of the language. How did he try to impart it to you?
Many different ways. He would show me things on the piano. He would talk about the people that he listened to before Bud Powell. For example, most good jazz pianists before Bud Powell came along, just before, were very enamored with Nat King Cole's piano playing.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
And so, yeah, Walter Bishop Jr. showed me how he learned Nat King Cole's piano solo on Body and Soul with the block chords, and he played that for me. And there were a lot of ways, including abstract, poetic ways, that Walter Bishop taught me. And this is a very important thing I want to note about how the elders were with the music in speaking to the younger people. Very often, they would abstract. For example, Art Blakey would say something like, see with your ears and hear with your eyes. And he wouldn't explain it further. He would leave it to you to figure it out. He would say, let the punishment fit the crime, and leave it to you to figure out what that meant. And that means be appropriate. If you're playing a funky blues, give it some heart. If you're playing a ballad, give it that feeling. Let the punishment fit the crime means be appropriate. But now, being 55 as an older person, when I speak to younger musicians and I try to tell them some of the things that the older musicians would say, inevitably a young person will ask me in turn, well, what did he mean by that? But the whole thing is, Nikhil, we would not ask them, what do you mean by that? They would say it to you and kind of look at you deeply to let you know they just laid something on you, and then they'd leave it to you to meditate on what they had said. It's helping you to learn to think for yourself. It's helping you to learn to think for yourself instead of just cutting and pasting sound bites from someone else, which doesn't really help you to grow. They were instilling in you a sense of depth and appreciation and wonderment for this music.
Can I get technical for a second? Do you for a few couple of small things? So, do you sing when you play? Is that something that you do?
Internally, I'm singing. I wouldn't say that I really sing out loud very much, but that's just me. You can hear some people singing. You hear, Bud Powell singing. Sometimes you can even hear McCoy Tyner or Herbie Hancock singing. A little bit, just a little bit. On occasion, you can hear Whitney Kelly singing. But myself, I don't have. Sometimes you can hear Oscar Peterson singing a little bit. So those are all great players who sing. I don't happen to outwardly very much, but that's just a personal thing. It's not because I think it would be a bad thing to do.
How do you tap your foot? It might be off the wall, but I'm very curious because now in Berkeley, everyone was saying tap on 2 on 4. But how do you tap your foot?
Well, unfortunately, my feet can be a little bit spastic. In other words, sometimes I get excited and they're not going in perfect time while hopefully my playing is in the pocket. But when I'm conscientious, of course I favor 1 and 3, which I learned from the older players.
All the older players are saying 1 and 3 all the time. Everyone is saying 1 and 3. I don't know where this 2 and 4 came from.
Beyond what they say, we now have YouTube, countless videos, thousands and thousands of videos. You can actually just watch an older master. And if you watch and observe, you can see that. So it goes beyond someone saying what you should or shouldn't do. What I want to emphasize is we have recordings now, more than just the oral sound recordings that I grew up with. Now we have video recordings that anyone can find on YouTube with a few clicks, and so we can actually observe for ourselves what an older player does rather than just have a controversy verbally between one another. We can listen and watch and learn. And that way we're going to the source.
Let me ask you another question. It's quite well documented that Barry Harris is not a fan of modes. I asked Charles McPherson, and he said, in terms of what do I want to play 80% of the time, it's not modes. He mentioned Charles Mingus is using modes, however. So what's your take on modes?
Honestly, I try not to make big lines of separation in that when we improvise, we want to be melodious, we want to be swinging, we want to be thoughtful, we want to be creative, we want to learn how to say as much as possible with as few notes as possible. And this to me applies whether we're playing chord changes or playing in a mode. I'm not trying to skirt or avoid your question, but I think these qualities, being melodic and swinging, etc., I would want to apply that whether I'm playing The Song Is You or I'm playing So What. Either way, my responsibility is to tell a story through my improvised lines to the listener. And in order for me to tell a story, I want to draw on my sense of melodicism. I'm creating melodies on the spot. And so any way that I can get to it, if I'm approaching something as a mode or I'm approaching it as a set of chord changes, I'm basically trying to virtually sing through my choice of notes.
You have a great quote that I like. You mentioned to an interviewer, you said, if somebody wanted to play with you, you said, I'm more interested in your musicianship, that you can swing, got a good feeling, can solo, good intonation, understand harmony, can play tempos, rather than perhaps learning my tunes. Let's talk a little bit about musicianship that you would expect somebody to work on. So let's take harmony, for example. So the question would be, if a young student is going to learn harmony, what's your approach to mastering harmony?
Oh, my goodness. I'm so far from ever hoping to master harmony, and I'm going to keep working on it throughout my life, but that's like saying mastering life.
Right.
We want to do better. Okay, so my approach to better harmonic knowledge, rather than mastery, is to understand what harmony actually functionally is. Harmony is color, and color imparts feeling, expression. So rather than just looking at this big abstract subject of harmony, I want to be specific with whatever song or tune I'm learning to understand that the harmony, or what we jazz musicians would think of as chord changes or chord sequence, for a particular song that I'm learning, is actually the colors that bring the melody out and which the melody is adorning. They're like one hand washing the other. So again, not being brainwashed by the coded system of a lead sheet or fake book, the harmony is very much like a sense of emotion inside our body, where emotion is experienced inside a physical human body as energetic movement, right? Heat, coolness, constriction, expansion, all these things that we feel ever shifting in our body and experience as emotion, emotional energy, that's effectively what harmony does. It humanizes and colorizes the song. Ray Brown, during my 4.5 years with him, gave me a deep appreciation for the axis between the bass note and the lead note of the melody, how they complement one another. And so he emphasized that I first, in learning harmony, find the bass note, the single note sort of on the bottom, which best supports what the melody is saying as the melody unfolds sort of in a horizontal sense, from note to note, bar to bar, moment to moment. And so this is, I want to say, this is the foundation for harmony. It's simply the access, the counterpoint between the lead melody and the bass on the bottom. Now, inside of that, that's like, if we're speaking like in a chakra sense, it's like the belly. We're looking at the music, the harmony, like it's a body, the human body. It's like the belly, the stomach, the solar plexus of the music. That's our harmonics, like any kind of clusters that you might come up with, and that they actually fit, in a sort of in a geographic sense, in between the lead melody and the bass notes. So the next thing I would endeavor to try to figure out in learning a song, in between the lead melody and the bass note, is what's the quality of chord here? I might try a major third of the root note I'm playing, and then I might try a minor third, and I might try a fourth or 11th, and just try to see that now I'm coming up with a third note. You see what I mean? After we've got the two notes, see which note most agrees. And of course, as you understand, and many of your listeners understand, a chord isn't necessarily always going to be a major or a minor or a suspension. It might be something else entirely. But this just as I'm experimenting, because as I mentioned earlier, I do not have perfect pitch, as I'm experimenting and finding harmony, this is my next search after the bass note. Is it a major third or minor third or something different? And basically, I proceed from there. Again, not using fake books as my source, but using records, great jazz records as my source. I'll listen to a master playing a song like Hank Jones or Tommy Flanagan or Red Garland or Wynton Kelly, and I listen to their recordings, listen to what they're doing to try to get a sense of the song. I've also been encouraged, if it's a song rather than a tune, in other words, a song that has lyrics rather than a tune which is written to be an instrumental, to listen to recordings by someone like Ella Fitzgerald or Frank Sinatra, because Ray Brown encouraged me. It encouraged me that if you listen to records by these kind of people, you're always going to get some really good harmony from those recordings. This is a very vast subject and a very important one that you're touching on here.
I actually have one more question. You mentioned Bud Powell earlier, transcribing a bit about Powell and stuff. I'm a huge fan of Bud Powell, but could you talk a little bit about him and like how he influenced your playing?
Oh, yes. So Bud Powell, as you understand, really represents conceptually the heart of what almost any straight-ahead jazz pianist who's come since does, in that the right hand is playing a single note line and the left hand is playing a chord. Now, Bud Powell didn't invent that, but he distilled it in such a way with the bebop language of Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker that he pointed the way, to what a modernist does today, to what the way Kenny Barron plays. That is so deeply rooted in Bud Powell's whole approach to the instrument. Again, we actually have videos that we can watch now. Not many videos of Bud Powell, but we have some. And when I began watching videos of Bud, it really helped me make a connection with his music, which I'd always loved on records, but just how very lean, how very stark his approach was, that the right hand is really speaking, or singing, as we said earlier, and the left hand is accentuating. There was like such a lack of filigree or like anything extraneous to these lines, and the accents and the rhythms that he instills the lines with is something, as you understand, Nikhil, much, much deeper than just some eighth notes. He combines these notes and phrases these notes in such a way that it's compelling. It really feels that he's speaking to us through these single note lines, and I fascinate in the rhythm of it and the way it goes deep into us just by playing some single notes. And I just continue to embrace his aesthetic as a player, that more and more as I get older, I want to be able to make a statement with a single note line rather than try to make an impression about how much piano I think I can play. And I want to say that whole aesthetic is profoundly informed by Bud Powell's whole musical personality and approach to the piano.
Did your mentor Walter Bishop Jr. hang out with Bud, or did he talk about Bud with you?
Oh yes. Well, the thing is, as Walter told me, and other people have confirmed, Bud Powell was a very, very difficult personality. He was really not a friendly person, and really not very emotive or per se talkative. Very, very difficult. He had some mental problems, of course, we understand, and he had some terrible things happen to him which affected his mind, and yet he was this genius player and composer, voice of the music. So Walter did tell me, even when he was quite young, he went on a double date with Bud Powell. Walter brought a girl and Bud brought a girl, but he said it was really embarrassing. He said Bud behaved like an infant, like really childishly, and it didn't match up with his playing apparently at all.
Now, Benny, I want to ask you about your original music, and I'm going to ask you, I'm going to mention a song, and just give me a description of what comes to mind of that song, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, so let's go back to the 80s when you recorded Not Yet with Art Blakey, Art Blakey's album Not Yet in 1988. There's a tune there that you wrote called Kenji's Mood. Could you talk about that?
That's right. Yes. Well, the thing is, when you played in the Jazz Messengers and when you wrote music for the Jazz Messengers, there's a very specific conception that you understand when you're in the Messengers. And it's informed from me by the Jazz Messenger pianists who came before, pianists and composers. So, I always considered Horace Silver and Bobby Timmons and Cedar Walton the cornerstone of the sound of a Jazz Messenger pianist. And there's a way that you wrote for the band, which Wayne Shorter really understood during his time with the band. The kind of music that Wayne Shorter wrote for the Jazz Messengers had a different kind of flavor than the kind of music that Wayne Shorter wrote for Miles Davis. When Wayne wrote for the Messengers, he wrote messenger-appropriate music. There's certain beats that Art Blakey plays, whether it's a kind of a Latin beat or if it's a kind of a shuffle. When you wrote for the Jazz Messengers, you embraced this aesthetic. Also, my very first hero in the music, please know, is Thelonious Monk. And he's the very first jazz pianist I heard, of course, through my father's records. And so when I wrote the piece Kenzie's Mood, I was really hearing the sound of Art Blakey's drums, and hearing the sound of the front line, trumpet, saxophone, and trombone, and wanting to write something that's appropriate for the Jazz Messengers. So I was really envisioning in my inner ear, conceptualizing how it would sound with Art playing it, how it would sound with his drums, how it would sound with the front line, and just imagining hearing that sound coming from the band on stage as it was before I joined the band, when I'd be out in the audience listening to the Messengers, wanting it to be, as Art Blakey said, let the punishment fit the crime. So the crime, if you will, in a poetic sense, the so-called crime is being in the Messengers, and the punishment, so to speak, is my piece of music. Let the piece of music fit the band. Let the punishment fit the crime. So I was wanting it to be simple, and just playing the piano and improvising the piano, I came up with the phrase of the first four bars. Dun-na, 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 dun-na. And I said, wow, I want to develop this into a song. And so that was how I wrote the piece, and Kenji was Art's youngest son, and so I named it after him.
Let's jump to Prelude, another album in 1988. And there are two tunes there that you wrote, Certainly and Debo's Delight. Could you talk about them?
Yes. Well, Certainly was very much inspired by the Blue Note records of the late 1950s and especially the mid-1960s that usually featured trumpet, tenor saxophone, piano, bass, and drums, as you know, like the instrumentation of the Horace Silver Quintet. But all those Lee Morgan and Hank Mobley records. So I was listening to a lot of their records, Lee Morgan and Hank Mobley playing together, the Hank Mobley album Dippin', and I wanted to write something that had that feeling. Like the cool thing, as I mentioned, which I originally heard with Charlie Parker and Miles Davis playing together. We have a saxophone and trumpet playing a melody, sometimes in octaves, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in unison, and that blend and that sound and that attitude. And the rhythm section maybe has a vamp up front, the way Horace Silver had establishing that Blue Note sound. And I was really trying to write something like that, like a mid-1960s Blue Note quintet piece that Lee Morgan and Hank Mobley would play.
Is that the same so both tunes, Debo's Delight as well?
Debo's Delight, I remember the piece, I remember writing it, but I think the inspiration for that wasn't as specific as it was for Certainly. It was more like really just trying to write something pretty. I really didn't, and it's straight ahead, of course, when I say pretty, by pretty, I mean many things, including just listenable. But it didn't have as specific an inspiration as Certainly, just to be honest.
Talk about Phoebe's Samba in the album Lineage in 1990.
Yes. Well, Phoebe's Samba was definitely inspired by Cedar Walton. Pieces like Ojos de Rojo and Fiesta Español that Cedar wrote and played, and I was hearing him play often around New York. I was wanting to write something like Ojos de Rojo, but maybe more simple, and I wanted to be able to play it with a quintet. I was working at the time sometimes with the tenor saxophonist Ralph Moore, and Roy Hargrove was very young. He had just moved to town. He was still a teenager. I remember I played a week at the Village Vanguard with Ralph Moore and Roy Hargrove, and I brought that piece in, and they enjoyed playing it, and Ralph recorded it on one of his albums. And then Freddie Hubbard also recorded this song, which was a great honor for me. And so that let me know that the horn players wanted to play it. That let me know that the song was valid. And Phoebe is my sister, so I dedicated it to her. And yeah, I was wanting it to have that feeling kind of reminiscent of some of Cedar Walton's writing.
And it should be noted that Lineage was your first Blue Note record, so that must have been quite a thrill.
Yes. What's funny is the way I came up with the personnel. I had a couple of great musicians playing with me on that album, the bassist Ray Drummond and the drummer Victor Lewis. The reason I wanted to play with Ray Drummond, it may sound kind of funny, but it was actually because I was frightened of him. I was intimidated by him because of his stellar musicianship.
Right.
Because he was a very friendly person. I was intimidated by his musicianship and the fact that he was working with all the great pianists who were older than me. So I saw it as a challenge. I wanted to have him play on my record so I could maybe try to get over being scared of him. And in the case of Victor Lewis, who I admired greatly and was honored that he would play on my record, I actually asked Michael Kaskuna, who was very closely affiliated with Bruce Lundvall at Blue Note, for some ideas. And when he mentioned Victor Lewis, I said yes right away. So he kind of came up with the idea for the drummer. I had just left the Jazz Messengers at the time of making that recording. And in hindsight, I realized that I could have actually invited Art Blakey to play on a few pieces, and that he would have done it because Art actually really loved me. But it just didn't even occur to me at the time that I could, that the label would have paid for it, and that more importantly, because Art wasn't for sale, of course, out of love, out of a sense of family, Art might have done this for me, and I would have had that experience of actually getting to lead Art for a moment. Because almost every single night that I work with Art, and you can ask any of the Messengers who are in the band, they'll confirm this, Art would feature me just about every night, playing about maybe 15 minutes of the solo piano, a medley, right in the middle of the second show, and then he and the bassist, at the time Peter Washington, would join me, and they'd play a trio piece before the whole band came back. So I'd had that experience with Art, playing trio and leading him in a sense, although it was his band, while we played the trio piece. And it never occurred to me that maybe I could ask him to play with me. But now I understand that more. Witness Thelonious Monk. His very first recordings were under the leadership of Coleman Hawkins in 1944. And then, as knowing the history, Nikhil, you know that in 1957, Thelonious Monk effectively returned the favor in inviting Coleman Hawkins to play on his album Monk's Music.
Let's move forward to Greens, 1991. You have 4 tunes there I want you to talk about. Greens itself, the title track, Bish Bash, Captain Hook, and Decidedly.
So, in the case of Greens, I just noticed that some of the pianists I admired had a signature blues piece that they had written and recorded early in their careers that maybe had their name in it, but that, of course, 12-bar blues being the most common form in all of straight-ahead jazz, I wanted to write my own signature blues. And when I listen back to that piece now, I realize it's a bunch of pieced together phrases, some of which I definitely borrowed from Oscar Peterson. And the thing is, having Christian McBride on bass and Carl Allen on drums, they gave me so much love, so much heart, so much just attitude in the music. So the piece actually starts with 2 notes from Christian's bass before I play anything on the piano. A pickup note, like really boldly, like sliding into the root on the downbeat. And just having his personality there also really helped inspire my writing. Also, that was the case with Captain Hook. I was having a rehearsal with the drummer Gregory Hutchinson in Brooklyn, just the 2 of us. We didn't have a bassist. And a beat that Greg played inspired the piece Captain Hook so vividly that I actually came up with just about the whole piece right then and there just by Greg Hutchinson playing a beat.
Wow.
And Captain Hook is it's a nickname at the time that I gave to Christian McBride. Captain Hook was dedicated to Christian. Decidedly was, again, going back to that trumpet saxophone quintet concept. So maybe you understand now in this conversation, Nikhil, that my piano playing and my trio arranging is actually very inspired by quintets, not just by trios. Like I want to sort of, instill my trio sound with the feeling and aesthetic of a quintet, only with the piano, bass, and drums.
Now, you do a lot of trios, you do a lot of solos. you never decided to do a quintet of your own?
Probably because I wouldn't be able to control what the trumpet and saxophone play during the solos.
Right.
And it's kind of a silly reason because I think about it almost every day, Nikhil. Like if I did put together a quintet, who would be in that band? And it's really difficult. So many of my friends play the tenor saxophone. I wouldn't want to offend one friend by hiring another. It's very personal. And so I've just been kind of staying in my lane with the trio. But my new recording, which will be released on October 19th, called Then and Now, is really an expansion for me orchestrally because I've augmented the trio on certain tracks with flutes. That's 2 flutes, concert flute and alto flute, and also with vocals. Veronica Swift, the fantastic young vocalist I've been performing with, I use her voice like horns in spots. Like I've layered 2 and 3 parts with her voice, and she's actually adjusted the timbre of her voice appropriately to sound like a tenor saxophone or an alto saxophone or a trumpet. And really proud of what she did vocally. And I'm also even playing a little bit of electric piano on some of the tunes on Road. And I was wondering if my audience is going to think that I was trying to make a commercial record, because I wasn't. This has all occurred organically.
Oh man, I would listen to Benny Green play, a thumb piano. I mean, seriously. I mean, you're just release something, okay? Don't worry about all of that. We just want to.
It's generous of you to say. I'm gonna hold you to it, Nikhil. When it comes
will.
out.
I mean, seriously.
I hope you give a listen. I hope you like it.
I mean, like if Beethoven or Mozart really wrote something for kazoo, I would listen to it. You know what I'm saying? I would listen. I wouldn't get upset. I wouldn't get upset if somebody didn't. I mean, well, that's ridiculous to hold an art. You should be free to do whatever the heck you want. You know what I mean?
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that, Nikhil. Thank you, man.
I do want to ask you about Testifying in 1992. It's such a great album, Testifying. Amazing Benny Green. Talk about Don't Be Shamed, Humphrey, Booze March, the title track, Carl's Blues. Just talk about that album. It was a great album.
Yeah, it was it was a thrill for me getting to make that album with Christian McBride and Carl Allen. The thing is that the record that you mentioned prior to this, Green, with the same band, had been released, and at the time, jazz radio stations in the U.S. were much more prevalent. We didn't have the internet and such, and the album Greens was like a hit on jazz radio, and it was so much of a hit that there suddenly was demand for my trio around the country to perform. So, and in Europe as well. So my trio had a very, very long tour. And my manager told me at the time, very astutely, she said, enjoy this, Benny, because you will probably never see a tour like this ever again. And she was right. To this day, even Christian McBride, who, as we all know, has played and recorded with everyone, he still talks about that tour, how epic that tour was. Because, Nikhil, we were on the road for it was over 2 months, almost straight, one-nighters in U.S. and Europe and Japan. And toward the end of the tour, we came and played a week at the Village Vanguard and recorded Testifying live at the Vanguard toward the end of the week. So what I want to emphasize, and you can appreciate as a musician yourself, is that the band was really flowing at that time. It wasn't like we just had some rehearsals, but we were like living with the music day after day, playing these arrangements in different venues with different sounds, with different audiences, playing it when we were really tired and exhausted, having fun, making mistakes, taking chances, trying things, trying it again. We had done so much of this for weeks and weeks prior to making Testifying.
I mean, Testifying, it's one of the greatest albums of all time, I think. It's amazing. What an album. Yeah, can you talk about some of the tunes on that? Did you write tunes specifically for that album?
I just wrote them for the band. So Don't Be Shamed. It actually originated, I was playing at a club, wonderful club in New York, which was called Bradley's, which really was a piano room. It featured piano and bass, and then piano, bass, and drums, and then in later years they started having horns. But it was traditionally, when I moved to New York in 1982, Bradley's specifically featured piano-bass duos. I could hear Hank Jones one week, Tommy Flanagan another week, Kenny Barron another week, Barry Harris another week. It was a real workshop for us. They play 3 shows a night, 10 p.m., 12 midnight, and 2 a.m. Each one would be a little over an hour, and they would be mostly playing standards, and I would listen to them and to really be taking notes, going to school, man. So when I was working once at Bradley's, I was just warming up the piano, and I was actually thinking about Barry Harris, and just the very opening phrase that I play on piano. That all started right there while I was sitting at the piano at Bradley's on an intermission. And then when I get to the second part where it goes, and Christian fills in, and there's fills, that was me imitating an Oscar Peterson riff. So that was like how that piece got started. Blues March, of course, is a play on the title Blues March, Benny Golson's piece. And again, I really wanted to write something that had the feeling of the Jazz Messengers, very much so, which is a real core of my jazz piano conception, the Jazz Messengers. So Blues March was a salute to Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. The Carl's Blues, that was inspired by up-tempo blues played by Oscar Peterson, like the piece The Smudge from the album Eloquence. That inspired Carl's Blues.
Humphrey?
And you mentioned Humphrey. Oh, yes. So actually, Humphrey, you'll be interested in knowing, is featured on my brand new recording, Then and Now, which is coming out October 19th. And I utilized Veronica Swift's voice to sing the melody with me. And she scattered on it, and she really got inside the phrasing. Humphrey was a nickname for Walter Davis Jr., who I also studied with additionally to Walter Bishop Jr. Humphrey was his nickname, and this piece was dedicated to him.
Yeah, he's known for being a really good Bud Powell. He knows a lot of the knowledge, right?
Oh, he hung out with Bud and with Monk heavily, and that's why I was studying with him to learn about their language, specifically about Thelonious Monk and Bud Powell. Walter Davis was deeply versed in their music, profoundly so. And so, yeah, Humphrey was a dedication to his sound and feeling, very much.
And the title track, Testifying.
Oh, yeah, Testifying, I would say, was inspired by Gene Harris and the Three Sounds. Some of the things they did, like It's Just Got to Be on Blue Note. Just supposed to just be a simple, kind of bluesy, kind of churchy feeling thing, where the drums can play kind of an organ beat. Like some drums might play with that kind of tempo groove they were playing with an organ trio. And that was basically inspired that.
Can you play the organ?
I actually had a Hammond B3 organ in my bedroom in Berkeley, California, in my family home as a teenager. I never learned really how to use the foot pedals, and I loved the sound and feeling of it. And then years later, it was really just sitting there in my bedroom. I wasn't really playing it much, and so my mother finally asked me if it would be okay to sell it because it was just taking up space, which I did. But I love the organ.
I want to actually just jump straight to Happiness. And could you talk about that album? Talk about a few of the songs in the album.
Oh, yes. So Happiness was recorded live at my favorite club in the whole world, the Kooumba Jazz Center in Santa Cruz, California. As I mentioned on the record, you can hear in the announcement, I've been playing there almost every year for over 30 years now. Since the record has come out, it's probably been over 35 years. I've been playing there almost every year, and still seeing some of the same faces in the audience. We're older now, and then young people coming all the time. But my sense of history and family with that club runs really, really, really deep. And for me, it's a spiritual thing to get to come back to this place. I mean, when we recorded Ray Brown's album Bass Face live in 1993, parents were in the audience, and I had my 30th birthday at the recording session, April 4th, 1933. So the spirits that I feel in this club, yeah, it's really heavy for me. So that was 25 years ago I'm talking about, that particular night. And just there have been so many special nights at the Kooumba.
Could you talk about just a couple of the tunes, like Down Under? Talk about Down Under.
Down Under, of course, is a Jazz Messengers piece. It was written by the trumpeter Freddie Hubbard, and he recorded it with Art Blakey and Jazz Messengers in 1961 on the album Mosaic. And again, that's a piece that was played with horns, with three horns, Freddie Hubbard, Wayne Shorter, and Curtis Fuller, along with Cedar Walton on piano, Jimmy Merritt on bass, and Art Blakey on drums. And so again, just like I was talking about earlier, about trying to apply a quintet sound to the piano trio, in this case, I'm taking the sextet, the three voices, and applying that to a trio, wanting to give our arrangement that kind of dynamic sweep and breadth of the Messengers. And some people don't want to play the piece because it's in F sharp minor. But, F sharp minor needs some love too.
The longest track on the album is Pittsburgh Brethren. Could you talk about that one?
Yes. So my father comes from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and so do two of my mentors, the man we've been speaking about, Art Blakey and Ray Brown. They all come from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I wanted to write a piece for them, Pittsburgh Brethren, Pittsburgh Brothers. And the melody was actually inspired by the sound of Stanley Turrentine's saxophone, and Stanley Turrentine also comes from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So, yeah, and I also wanted, I never want to get too far away from the Messengers' aesthetic, even as I grow and expand. I never want to really, actually turn my back on that. And so that was my jumping off point, the sound of Stanley Turrentine's tenor saxophone. I actually wrote the piece when I made the Blue Note album in 1996, Kaleidoscope, for Stanley to play on the album. And we rehearsed it, but it never came together. And so it's not on that record. I first recorded it in 2000 on my Telarc album, Naturally, with Russell Malone and Christian McBride in a different key. And I wanted to bring it back in the trio, but in a darker key. So we play it in B-flat minor now. And, so inspired by Stanley Turrentine, dedicated to the brothers of Pittsburgh, and really wanting it to have the feeling, that emotional feeling that the Messengers give me.
Let's end off with this one question. A young musician who wants to learn this music, what's the best piece of advice you can give that student?
Listen to records. You're not going to get to inside of jazz without studying records. No amount of books, no amount of fake books, no amount of talking with people about the music substitutes for listening to the records and playing along with records. More, when we talk about transcribing, the main thing I do in embracing the classic jazz records, more than writing out people's solos, is I play along with the records, try to match the rhythm of it, try to blend my sound, and I let the records, the language the musicians are speaking on the records, which cannot be put into words, I let that inform my jazz conception. My number one encouragement to a young musician is listen to great jazz records and try to find someone older than you who's playing you admire. Not just that they're a teacher, but when they play their instrument, you like the way it sounds and feels. And listen to them because there's so much history and culture to the music which can get lost with each successive generation. And this is why it's important to try to absorb what you can from people who've come before you.
Benny, thank you so much for coming on the show. I mean, you're so modest, but I mean, if you were a person who'd never heard of Benny Green and you just listened to the show, you would think, oh, Benny's, he's this guy is like the top of the top in the world. I mean, it's not even, it's ridiculous how good you are. And I'm so thrilled that you came on the show to talk music with me. Did you have a good time on the show?
Nikhil, I must tell you, it's a great pleasure speaking with you, and I'm so very inspired to realize that someone like yourself, living in a whole different part of the planet than me, is a real bebop lover. That gives me so much encouragement, and I want to thank you for your interest and the time that you spent with me, that you and I together through your show can hopefully help expose some other people where you live to this wonderful music.
I really hope you come back on the show. We want to talk about your new album that you release next year.
No, thank you. I was saying it's actually coming out this year, October 19th. It's called Then and Now. And Nikhil, I will really look forward to us continuing this dialogue in our next. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Benny, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.
And to you as well, sir. Thank you.